Welcome to the annual meeting of the Lake St. Catherine Association. In all the order, first we'd like to thank the Lake St. Catherine Country Club for this wonderful venue to have our meeting in. It's always pleasant here, and we enjoy ourselves. The next thing we'd like to do is introduce the guests that we have, and unfortunately, the call from the full select board couldn't make it tonight due to a previous commitment, but Fran Gilman from the Wells Select Board is here, and we'll make a couple of comments. We also have a guest speaker tonight we will introduce in a few minutes. But Fran, would you like to take it?
Good evening, everybody. I'm one of the selectmen on the Wells. Few things that we covered that the interest of everybody is a lot of complaints on the speed on West Lake. So we do have the sheriff's department that we contract with, and we have tripled their hours to maintain it. And you'll should see it patrolling West Lake Road, Old Rock Hollow Road, and all different around. One thing that we are trying to do is we're doing a traffic study, and we're going to try to get the speed limit lower down to 25 on West Lake Road, same as it is as you're going up to Bolton at the other end of it. Traffic studies in the works. The one thing that we're working on for that, and one of the things that we can use to help from anybody on West Lake Road is the sheriff's department. There's really no place for them to park. So if anybody would be willing to let the sheriff park in the driveway, watch traffic, you could let me know, and that would happen. See what else. The other thing is, we're glad to see that Conservation Fund and Lake Association, that group of other members, they're communicating with each other so everybody knows what everybody else is doing. That's important for the select board. Seeing that we very well as we have both organizations. Hopefully that work together and make it better.
Thanks, Fran. It's always good to work with you and get support. I've been asked to read a notice here. It's for the family of Philip Pope. The children of Philip G. Pope will lay his ashes to rest next to Velvet Patty Folly at the St. John's Church in East Fulton, Vermont, Saturday, September 3rd at 11 a.m. There will be a short graveside ceremony. A reception will follow at the Lake House. We will be sure to mention memories of Phil and his well-lived life. If you'd like to attend, if you could call at 802-297-9344. It isn't necessary, but it would help in the plan. Okay, thank you. Okay, it's hard to get good help. And so tonight I'd like to take a minute to express our appreciation to one of our trustees who will be departing us, Martha Pope, and her husband are moving to Colorado. And it's a big loss for us because Martha had set up all of our grant programs as we are going forward here. And it's probably about over $100,000 in funds for special projects for the lake. So Martha, we're all going to miss you, and say a couple of words to them. Would you like to say a couple of words to them? So let me see. I gotta have my prompt up there. Oh yeah, okay. So I guess all we can do is have you enjoy things, and the raffle is going to happen later, and as we have always had very good support from Williams Hardware, They again donated an item for the raffle, and it was a very nicely decorated fire pit. So thanks for coming, and we'll get underway with the presentation.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. Some general business we need to take care of. These are our minutes from the meeting last year. This was our agenda. So we just want to put those up there. Our presentation from last year is also available online, and you can read it there. So we'd like to approve the minutes from last year. Do we have a motion for that? So, and can we have a second? All right. Thank you very much. So we're all set there. All in favor? Sorry. Thank you. So we have a very special guest tonight. Eric Hanson from Vermont Ecostudies is here. I know everybody's excited about the loons that we've been seeing for many years on the lake. They're definitely more and more every year. And so we're really happy that Eric could join us today. And he's going to tell us all about loons, which is going to be very cool.
All right, I gotta learn how to do this with 2 hands. All right, so I work for a group called Vermont Center for Ecostudies. My name's Eric Hanson. I've been doing the loons in Vermont since 1998, and there weren't many back then on Lake St. Catherine. Occasionally I hear about them in migration, maybe a straggler, especially a young loon, a subadult, a 1 or 2 year old. They kind of look like a big chick, all gray and white. They might stick around over the summer. And then occasionally we'd hear about a loon just sort of hanging out in July. I want to really acknowledge Harry and Sylvia Bingham and for their work with me over the last 20 plus years. They have been my main contact, going out on our annual count the 3rd Saturday of July, checking what's there, even if there's nothing there, which was a very important note to make. You know, it's like, okay, we don't need to monitor that pond that closely, that lake that closely. But she did it every year, regardless of whether seeing 0 or 1 or none or subadult. So it's just been amazing to have them along. We now have a family called the Joan and Jansons, who've been doing the count the last 2 or 3 years. And we want to get more and more people involved, especially watching this development of this pair. If we have a pair forming, it can be a little tricky. Seeing 2 birds consistently from May or late April into July is a good sign. If they're kind of there all the time and you're seeing 2 all the time, next spring we really want to see what they're up to. Where are they poking around? What marsh are they in? They like nesting in marshes and islands. Jeremy was saying they've been seeing them down in the channel south of the boat access toward Little Lake. So we're going to want to watch that area. Are they going to try something naturally? Are they going to be nesting 10 feet off someone's dock, which isn't going to work if the grandkids are coming next weekend? So, you know, we can think about management strategies like nesting rafts to promote an island, and anything we can do to help them. But we also like to let them sort of make their first move on their own, sort of see where they want to go. We tried this up on Hortonia, where we were watching a pair for 3 years. The last 3 years, we put a raft out this spring. We didn't know any idea where they might consider nesting. It just looked like we had a pair forming, and they nested on the opposite side of the lake on a lily pad marsh, right between 2 access points. Luckily, both folks were totally into it, and it was unfortunately in the literally last 3 or 4 days, someone got the eggs. Most likely an eagle, although a heron was harassing them. I've never heard of a heron taking an egg, but it may have poked the egg and caused damage. But they'll be back next year. We're going to shift that raft up into that corner, partly because, again, it's a busy lake. The raft can help sort of guide them to nest, maybe, if we can get them to it, in a place that's a little more out of the way, isn't going to cause as much conflict with land use, especially, and as well as boating use. So that's kind of a little background just to keep your eye open for. Before I jump in, I'm going to send around this sheet for if anyone wants our newsletter. I do a once-a-year loon newsletter, and then the group I work for does a field notes, and we can send you copies of both of those just to get you familiar with what we're up to, and you learn a little bit more about loons. So I'll pass that around. and you can sign up if you want. You don't have to, but it's some good information. I brought a few of the copies over here, as well as the story of the loon we rescued last fall. And so pick a copy of that up. The guide for boaters. Unfortunately, I don't have many of the guide for lakeshore owners, but we can get more of those. I'll get more to Jeremy and some others to pass around. Just ways to help our habitat. I'm going to end the program with that. And then just a handful of newsletters from last year. That's all I got left. So we're going to jump into the program. I apologize ahead of time. I'm going to cover a 45-minute program in 15 minutes. So we'll see what happens. Really fast. So here's what our group, VCE, they do lots of songbird work, but we've really gotten into insects, bumblebees, dragonflies, butterflies, moths, lady beetles, just kind of what's out there, what's of concern, what's not of concern, what's doing really well. So we're doing a lot of that work. We have volunteer projects doing songbird surveys up and down mountains from the Catskills to northern Maine. We have biologists going to Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic and Haiti, following our songbirds down there, trying to figure out what's happening in the wintering zones, and then what are they doing up here in northern Vermont, as well as all around New England into Canada. So there's lots of different programs going on, lots of ways for volunteers to get involved. This is the easiest volunteer program, just because you don't need to know 30, 40 songbirds. You can just know one big black and white bird that's out in the middle of the lake. So it's pretty nice, but lots of fascinating stuff, more research than management and actual on the ground conservation, but it guides the conservation. The Loon Project's the most sort of outreach and management sort of program. So obviously pretty cool to watch this bird. You can see it every hour of the day and not interfere with its daily activity. I throw this title in there because there's just so many fascinating things when you dive into the life of a loon. And territorial takeovers is when a bird challenges another bird for a spot in a territory. Sibling rivalry, that's where two chicks might go at it. One may not make it. Mercury, I won't even touch on that tonight, but they're a great indicator to follow what's going on in our lake ecosystems. I just did some banding Wednesday night up in the First Connecticut Lake to take blood samples, feather samples, and we're going to do a little bit of that in Vermont starting next week. So we'll be up at night with spotlights, trying to catch some birds, put some bands on, take blood samples. And then I've not been involved with the satellite tracking, but I'll show the migration of what we've learned through that. So again, I work for VCE, but I partner with Fish and Wildlife, mainly the game wardens. When we have a bird in trouble, like the one last year, the game wardens actually tried to catch that. The bird was swimming, totally avoided them. And I came down the next day when it started beaching, and Mary Jo and I were able to nab that bird. So I'll tell a little of that story in just a minute. Again, Fish and Wildlife is who I work for, or partner with. But the main ones are the ones on the right. So I kind of call myself a coordinator, and volunteers is the biggie. I can't cover the entire state by myself. I'm based up in Craftsbury, about 3 hours from here. So I get down here about once every month, or my assistant, Eloise Gerard, and we'll be checking out different lakes. I work really closely with hydroelectric companies, especially to help control water levels, or at least watch where they are when birds are nesting. I was just on Somerset Reservoir last night and this morning. And that group has been great, Great River Hydro. Most of my funding is from individual donors, so I'm always looking for help. Would love to talk to you more about that support. We can't do it without people helping us. We get a small amount from the Vermont, the non-game program, but most of it is through others. It's hard to fund long-term projects like this through grants, so we really need people to help out. Love to get people involved, to get hands-on experience, go canoeing with me, climb up Mansfield, hold a songbird. It's a great project to get involved with. Always looking for assistance. Almost every photo in this slideshow is from local within the state, so lots and lots of contributors. And here's kind of what we do, that we monitor all the pairs in the state. We manage around the nest sites when necessary. Lots of educational activities like this, working with the volunteers. They become our educators. I spent well over almost half my time just coordinating with volunteers by email, by phone. Rescues when we need to, always hoping that there's not too much of that. And we're getting more into the research, studying about malaria in loons recently, aspergillosis, a fungal disease. We're seeing more lead sinker cases, so we're trying to do more on that. And that's all because we're doing necropsies of birds that don't make it. And it's one thing I've picked up working with Vermont Institute of Natural Science. And what's great is volunteers can really partake in everything in that realm. So you see a beautiful lake, you hear that loon call at the end of the lake. But back in 1983, there weren't that many. Those are where the nesting sites were, those stars. The annual count, under 30 birds. There probably were more than that. They didn't hit every lake. Lots of things going on, from shoreline development to fishing line and lead, to natural things like predators, to just busy lakes. And nesting is really the vulnerable time. But the pair is going to come back. They often show up within hours of ice out, or within a week or two anyway. And they're coming back to set up their territories if there's a pair on the lake. Otherwise, they might just be floating through. A territory tends to be about 100 acres, 150 acres. So you could actually get conceivably several pairs on a Lake St. Catherine sized lake. The pairs are going to spend several weeks to even a month or more before they actually start nesting. They're establishing the boundaries with other loons. They're looking at nest sites. They're working on nest sites. They might work on multiple nest sites. So finding a spot in a territory, they might go to an unoccupied lake. So Lake St. Catherine would fall into this category. They might replace a breeder that died the previous winter. That's probably where we lose most of our loons, or one that just moved to another area for some reason. And then the one that's really fascinating is this usurpation. Get your SAT words here. And this is where a male will take on a male and a female will take on a female, and the other one accepts the winner. So it's definitely a way that they find a spot. They're always doing these intrusions. They're always sort of checking each other out. And so it's really amazing to watch, but it can be really devastating. I was just on Great April Thursday morning. The chick disappeared Wednesday night due to a battle, and the battle had been going on for a day and a half. I mean, literally two probably we think the males grabbing each other by the throats and whacking each other with their wings. And so it's like right 100 feet from the volunteer's dock. So that's my other job is therapy. So if anyone needs it. They like marshes and islands. So here's an island nest up in the woods a little bit. They would never do that, or rarely would ever do that on an exposed shoreline, upland shoreline, because there's just too many predators that would get a nest. But if it's up on a lit island, then they might pop up that far. But usually they're right by the water with a little water around it, again, to try to get away from the shoreline predators. They'll start anywhere from mid-May to even late June. They can start a nest. I think we've even had an early July. But that's usually like a re-nest where they failed in June sometime and then they re-nested. Takes about a month. They can nest at 3, but really they wait a long time. Wait till they're 6 or 7. They're stronger. They know the area. They know where the weak spots are. They know where there's an opening to move in. So here's some typical nest sites. Again, this is the most vulnerable thing. When a predator could get the eggs can get knocked in the water. If they're off the nest for too long on a busy Saturday, Memorial Day weekend, and people are disturbing them just because there's activity on the shore or boats, then the eggs may not make it, or if they might just give up. So one of the things we'll do is if it's in a high traffic area, we'll put out nest warning signs, asking boaters just to give them a little space. We'll work with landowners. If they're nesting right next to people, we might put out one of these rafts, or flooding is a real big issue. We might put these out when we know the water might go up and down 6, 7, 8 inches with a 1-inch rainstorm. But if that's not a huge issue, then we'll allow for some flooding. It's definitely a natural way for them just to sort of have failed nests. Here's probably a less than 1 week old chick. They do a lot of back riding in that first week. Definitely the cute and fuzzy stage. They get a little older, they'll start becoming a little more independent. They can start diving actually right away, but they won't do bigger dives until they're probably 2, 3, 4 weeks of age. Mom and dad are both carrying and incubating about equally in everything. The only thing that's statistically different that came out in a study of like 3,000 hours of over 2 years of watching banded birds was the male spends more time resting with the young by 2%. So not a lot. They're both highly involved. Here's the difference between a big chick and a subadult. So that upper left picture is a subadult. It's sort of uniform gray. And then these pictures are 2-year-olds on Lake Champlain on the right. And then the lower one is a big chick. And you can see some little whitish fringes at the tip, at the end of the body feathers. But that would be in September that a chick would look that. Otherwise, they look like they did in those previous shots. So you really shouldn't confuse them early in the season, but you could September and October. Later in the season, the adults actually do a partial molt, that lower left picture, and they start looking like a big chick before they migrate down to the ocean. And our birds go off the New England coast. Here's the dotted lines are some Vermont banded birds that were found. Oh, that one wasn't way. I was doing this on PowerPoint 2 nights ago, really late. It's not supposed to be out in the middle of the ocean. It was on Cape Cod, out of Chatham. Oh well. But you can see that's where they head, is to the ocean. The lines actually indicate satellite telemetry followed birds. This was a surgical working with veterinarians, and they were actually able to follow those birds. And they took a reading every 2 days. And each of those lines represents a 2-day window. So most of those birds flew to the ocean without stopping. 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, probably faster with a tailwind. The dotted line is a chick, and that chick over in New York took 56 days to reach Long Island Sound. But once it learns its route, then it'll figure it out for the future. And they tend to come back near where they hatched, but not necessarily to the same lake. And you can see some of the birds on the right are banded, and so that's what you look like for. All right, do you want to try to see if these work? Okay. There's a crescendo and then these repeat syllables. And that's a yodel. Only the male does that. And that's a real territorial sign, mainly aimed at another loon, but it could be aimed at float planes, eagles. It's really upset about maybe somebody coming in too close to a nest. Okay, next. The whale call. A common one you hear at night. They're sort of just identifying who's out there. It's more of like, where's my mate? Who's on the other end of the lake? It could be the initial signs of an alertness, like something's up, but not too serious. Next, the tremolo. The other common night sound. And this is a bird that's it's agitated or doesn't know what's going on, so it's just gonna like sound off. Again, often aimed at eagles, another loon. And it's or a boater that's coming in too close to the chicks. When someone disturbs a nest, they tend to be silent. They don't want to draw attention to the nest. But when they have chicks, they're going to be a lot more vocal. And we can try the hoot. Hear it. This is close communication when they're with a family group or with another loon. So those are the main ones. So now you have a little idea what's going on out there. So some of the issues is fishing gear. Definitely fishing gear is the leading cause of mortality of loons. The fishing gear law from 2007 has been very effective, but for some reason, the last 4 years, we've had 7 cases, which is almost 2% of the population. And so we're going to be doing a big outreach next year to get people to look in their tackle boxes and get that lead out of that tackle box and drop it off. We're hoping to have a station here working with Lake St. Catherine Association where people could drop their lead off. We'll have a voucher program as well. So we'll be looking for lake associations to help sort of help lead that, where we actually give a $10 voucher to bring in some lead. You can go bring it to your local tackle shop. It's not that we're looking to, and also just to raise awareness, just to see if we can reduce some of the lead issues that we're having, as well as the fishing line. But it's always going to be an issue. Loons learn that anglers can be a source of food, and they will take live bait and lures. They'll go after the fish that you're kind of bringing in. And unfortunately, loons have learned that anglers can help them. And we wish that wasn't the case, but sometimes it happens and sometimes they're going to get caught. So the bird from last October, this one is a case I've never seen before, but that treble hook was attached to both feet. I don't know how it got tangled or how it got caught up, but somehow it pierced into the webbing of the feet on both sides. It was a mess. The picture on the left is right after we extracted the hooks over at VINS, Vermont Institute of Natural Science. Gray O'Toole was helping me. There was definitely some necrotic tissue already. But even with both feet bound, it was able to outswim the game wardens the day before. Go figure. We worked with a group in Freedom, Maine called Avian Haven. They had a vet who's actually worked with surgically trimming off webbed feet and trying to get bad tissue off. And so they went for it, and that's all the tissue they removed to get rid of the decaying tissue. They got it so it was healing. They kept the bird for about a month or 3 to 4 weeks. and it was swimming at a good 80–90%, they think. So they put a band on it and released it on the ocean in November last year. So we're hoping that this bird can make it. And again, we have a band on it, so if it ever does return to this area, hopefully we'll be able to see that. And here's the release. Here, the pool is up in the upper left, and then at the release, it actually reared back at the releaser, and then swam off and hopefully had a good winter. So what can we do in Vermont if they do start nesting here? Even if they're not nesting, is we watch for the nesting areas. We don't always put signs out at nest sites. Watch from a distance. Use non-lead. Reel in if the loons are diving right near you. And it's a matter of respect. And loons have really responded to this. I think Vermont has some of the best educated people on loon awareness than anywhere in North America. And we also have some of the highest productivity of anywhere in North America, I think, as a result. So here's the results, and you almost never see this in a conservation program of this level of success. Looking back at where we were at 20, 30 pairs, and then the increase, so following the red is the nesting sites, nesting numbers. So we're up over 100. We're at about 105, 106 this year. I'm expecting this to start to plateau, and you can actually look at those chick numbers. They're starting to level off, which is actually a good thing. Just sort of population stabilization. That's what's going to happen with competition, with eagles. It means losing more nests, losing chicks, and birds not nesting just because there's too much going on with other loons. And here's where they are today. In central and southern Vermont, this is all in the last 25 years that we've seen this big increase, actually 30 years. And this year, just a little update, they nested on Hortonia, a little pond called Hanson Pond. I've never been to it. It's like you have to go up a private road to get there, but the landowners contacted me and said, got a bird sitting on a nest. And they had a chick. Oh, actually, no, I haven't heard the outcome of that yet. There's another new tiny pond in Shrewsbury called Johnson Pond I need to check out. They had a failed nest on Lake Maury, but we may have lost the pair on Sunset Lake, which does happen with new pairs. They might form for a year or two and then dissolve and move out to other places. And last year we counted about 350 adults statewide. So I'm going to finish up just by showing, talking about what we can do to help the loons out is to help take care of our lake. And you guys have gotten a lot of this information before, but it really makes a difference to have really healthy underwater and shoreline areas around our lakes. And the woody debris is great for shading, for all the eggs of fish, for places to hide, for those little critters. It helps prevent and then having the riparian zones to prevent runoff. And it's hard to get excited sometimes about phosphorus, nitrogen, and runoff and sedimentation. But if we can think of it as helping the loons, maybe we can think about what can we do even minorly to reduce the effect of going into the water. And we all have different ideas of what our lake shores should look like. And it's a matter of tweaking what we have. I mean, you can still have your beach, you can still have your docks, your pathways, but if you can keep some of it more focused up by the cabins and the houses, and then have your pathway to the lake, have a smaller area, right, open to the shoreline. It just provides habitat for all sorts of critters, from frogs and birds to the aquatic insects, to the zooplankton and the phytoplankton, the little things we're not thinking about as much. It's also helping lots of other top of the food web species like peregrines and ospreys, great blue herons. And without a healthy lake, we're not going to have healthy fish. And that's important for not only loons, but anglers as well, to make sure we have enough. And a lake like St. Catherine can have, again, several pairs of loons, great fishing for everybody. They do eat a lot of fish, but a healthy lake should be able to support all of that. And the food web is super complicated, and it's just a matter of what can we do to maintain that food web? And if we take a few of those critters out of that food web, it can make that food web start to collapse a little bit, or at least not function as well. And so not having that shoreline, I guess, again, rocks and stones and good sediments and the woody debris, all of that can help create better places for those smaller organisms that we don't think about. And there's been several studies that show when you have an open cleared area, you just don't get fish nesting, you don't get green frogs, you don't get a lot of these other critters that would otherwise be there. And so if you can leave even half your shoreline and get it more developed or more protected, more wildlife habitat, that might promote just a little more habitat for all these other critters. So it can be very simple, from just not mowing a 10-foot swath, a 30-foot swath, even more if you can. And again, you can keep that open view, cut some limbs, let the shrubs grow, and then just do what you need to do to maintain what you like about the lake shorefront. But again, you can replant stuff from the woods behind you. It's free. You don't necessarily have to hire a landscape architect and pay $1,000 or whatever they do. You can actually just do it yourself and let things grow wild a little bit to see what happens over years, experiment. There's lots of great resources through the Lake St. Catherine Association and the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds. So it's all of these critters are going to benefit. We've done so much work to bring loons back, and we just need to make sure our lakes stay healthy so they keep thriving, so that all the critters keep thriving, not just the loons. I feel guilty focused on a single species, but I'm hoping that this will help motivate people to think about the broader issue of lakes and wildlife. So we got loons pairing up. We got some having chicks, hopefully. We got intruder loons coming in, causing trouble or checking things out. And they're doing their little courtship dances and defending. And it's all part of loon life. I'm hoping it becomes a bigger part of your life, and really appreciate you having me. You can email me at any time on these pamphlets. Go to the VCE website, look for the loon page, and we'll get more information out to everybody. So thank you so much. I'll be sticking around for dinner, so I'll be around for questions. We'll save that for then, so you can get through this meeting and on to the dinner.
Thanks, Eric. That was awesome. So now we're going to go to Martha. She's going to talk about a bunch of stuff about the association.
Hello, everyone. It's sort of an emotional night for me, so I'm going to kind of stick to the script. It's not that I don't want to have eye contact with all of you, but maybe that is it. So I'm Martha Poffett. You've met some of our board members before. Our president, Jeremy, you know. Such was great to welcome you in. Talk about Mary Jo. So I'm vice president of the board, and I've had the pleasure of being the grant writer. And it's a thrill for me to present to you, especially this year. Last year, we told you that we'd work over the rest of 21 and into 22 to bring as many resources as possible. To continue our work on your behalf. And here is where it led us. Our top 5 priorities for 2022. I'll discuss the first 3. I'm happy to report that we have been awarded more than $125,000 from the Lake Champlain Basin Program and new grants, and it was in a highly competitive cycle, the most external resources that we've brought in ever. Next slide, please. The goal of the grant-funded watershed action plan that we've talked about a little bit last year and more this year we will, that we will be developing over the next 3 years. And as a reminder, it is, what are the issues that threaten the health of our lake the most, and what can we do about them? Next slide, please. So we've assembled the Brain Trust to help assist us in areas that we have not explored yet to date. And here are some of our partners. Next slide, please. Our hope is to not leave any stone unturned. Next slide, please. Those will be rewarded who can demonstrate success in understanding and tackling the high phosphorus concentration in the South Basin of Lake Champlain, in which we reside. And this is how we plan to go about it. Slide, please. And as we plan, we will also do. So in 2022, we will identify the next 10 to 12 projects, major projects, that will deal with stormwater runoff and begin preparing them for implementation. Please be our eyes and our ears when there are storm events that cause havoc across your property or those of your neighbor. Next slide, please. You have helped us build culture. A culture of caring. And next slide, please. Here is our star of stage and screen, Sue Williams. Raise your hand, Sue. Who earned a Lakewise Award this year, if you'd like to ask for more about her experience later. Our next slide, a brand new partnership that we're very proud of this year is with the Wells Village Library. It resulted in a fabulous community event on July the 3rd called Libraries Love Lakes. And it will result in a new section of the library called the Lake St. Catherine Collection, a ribbon to be cut in September. So the next slide. What is this really all about? Well, it's about relationships. First, the tried and true ones. Our own board. I appreciate the way that the Board of Trustees has organized itself with portfolios that leverage skill sets and maximize accountability. The Poultney Meadow Wheat Group, our local partner in both project implementation and funding, and yes, the Department of Environmental Conservation, whose grant and aid supports our greeters and our divers. Second, our ongoing relationships that mean so much to us, our municipalities. Wells and Poultney, through their stipend, yes. But this year, the Wells, for example, letting us use the Lakeside Park for our education and outreach event, and Fran for your presence here tonight. And third, new relationships. For example, this year's crop of 31, yes, 31, an all-time high number of members who wish to do their part via the Lakewise program. To join others such as the Crandalls who are here tonight, the Michaels and the O'Connells, and prior Lakewise winners. I'm sure they will invite you over. Next, Castleton University, both as a partner in our watershed action plan and in developing an expertise at the college in lake stewardship by supervising the Lakewise students that we have and by evaluating our efforts. A great resource to you we have discovered is the Wells Village Library, and they have taken the leadership in both short and long-term education on lake issues, as well as their own outreach to include the Poultney Public Library and Libraries Love Lakes nationally. Their board member, Mary Beth Harrison, and her family and friends for piloting and decorating and promoting our efforts by their entry into the boat parade, and to Gina Ellis, the Wells librarian, for including our spring newsletter that portrayed all of the good work in a time capsule buried at noon today. 25 years from now, here's hoping that it inspires the next generation of lake stewards to do like. And finally, congratulations are in order to Robin Barley Wagoner and Carla Dendorf here as the new president and vice president at the Conservation Fund. So all of these essential relationships, however, stand on the shoulders of the fundamental relationship with you. Our greatest asset is the support and goodwill, testimonials, and your role as ambassadors that are our members. You build our reputation by word of mouth and by participation. You are the ones that see the main lake has never looked better. You are the ones who contribute to the Lake St. Catherine Facebook group with photos, happy times, and really love for the lake in ways that we could never say just on our own. You build this climate of civic pride. And you also stay with us when controversy swirls around us and grace us with your support and your trust that we are doing thoughtful, science-driven, evidence-based decision-making on your behalf. That support that goes way beyond your dues and donation and is a precious commodity. That is never taken for granted. So as people like me rotate off the board, I hope that people like you will rotate on. Because going forward, our reputation will become the single greatest source of funds for our work. Starting next year, federal and state funds will flow to regional models for water quality and watershed management. And for us, that means that priorities will be set by the Poultney Meadow Wheat District and the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. So earlier today, to get ahead of that, the Board of Trustees of the Lake St. Catherine Association unanimously adopted a resolution petitioning these groups that the association be appointed to their advisory council on funding decisions, on setting priority projects, and on being directly involved in the planning process for the future. With the kind of support that you provide us, memberships up, donations at an all-time high, evidenced by a sold-out annual meeting, how could they say anything but welcome to Lake St. Catherine? But that will be in a report to you in 2023. So for now, for all the reasons above, we just say thank you.
Jeff Crandall is going to talk about our milfoil control program.
Thanks, Jeremy. So just for starters, I think most of you know at this point what milfoil is, but just to recap quickly, it's a plant that's not native to North America. It first showed up in the United States in Chesapeake Bay in 1960. In the 1960s, probably came in through the water discharge, from a freighter or some other ship. And it's been in Lake St. Catherine since the early 1970s. And it really is not a plant you want in your lake at all. It can grow up to 20 feet high. It creates very widespread mats very quickly. It has no natural enemies like some other plants do. And importantly, the slightest fragment can start new plants. So if a little bit is chopped up by a boat, that will spread across the lake. It'll find a place to drop down. It'll start a new plant. That plant will create an acre relatively quickly. It's an extremely nasty plant and something we definitely don't want. Next slide, please. So just in terms of identification, I get a lot of calls from people. I've got milfoil in front of my camp. Can you come and do something about it? And very often it is milfoil. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's other things. So if you look at the next slide, pondweed on the left, that's a plant that, throughout my entire life on the lake, it's always been here. It's a native plant. It's a plant that you want. If you have too much of it right around your dock, it comes up very easily, but it's definitely a native plant and something that, from a fish cover perspective and the like, it's something you want to see. The next one, LOD, it looks a little bit like milfoil, but you can see what the differences are on the right. Bladderwort looks even more like milfoil, but if you look at the two closely, versus the prior slide, you can see pretty quickly that that's not milfoil. Next slide, please. So one question is, we've spent a lot of time, effort, and money over the last 20 years in dealing with milfoil, and often we get questions, why are we doing this? And first, milfoil can have a very significant adverse impact on water quality. It comes close to eliminating native plant species and diversity because it can outcompete them for space and for sunlight. It increases sedimentation. And so if you think about it, milfoil can grow to 20 feet high. That means it goes all the way out until you get to a drop off where it's more than 20 feet deep. And that entire mat, that entire acre after acre after acre of milfoil, if left unchecked, would basically die in the fall, drop down, create a significant amount of new sediment, which creates even more plant growth, and it adversely affects water quality. It also affects pH and can affect the temperature levels as well. Next slide, please. So just one thing just to mention is if you go back to 2004, which is when we really started our really significant efforts at controlling milfoil. For those who were around at the time, you can remember what the lake looked like before then. For those who were not here, just to recap quickly, again, the milfoil 20 feet high went out to where it was more than 20 feet deep. The entire shoreline was choked with milfoil. And to make things even worse, you couldn't get away from it by going out past where it was 20 feet deep because giant mats were chopped up by boats and were floating all over the lake. So it was really not a pretty sight. And if you compare the way the lake looked in 2003, the way it looked now, it's really a remarkable difference. So one of the things that we're doing, through our greeter program, which you'll hear about a bit later, and others is, we've spent a lot of time educating boaters on best practices to limit the spread of milfoil. Next slide, please. A couple of years ago, we started a volunteer milfoil cleanup, and a lot of this really relates to milfoil that's floating on the lake. And you might say, why do we care so much about milfoil that's just floating? Isn't it, it's not attached to the bottom of the lake anymore. And the problem is milfoil can put out runners, these little white roots that you see on the side of a floating plant. That'll find a place to drop down. It'll reseed itself, spread very quickly. So getting it out of the lake is very important. And when Jeremy first told me a couple of years ago that he was going to organize these drop-off sites, I was curious to see how responsive our property owners would be. And then not long after we started, Jeremy sent me a picture of this drop-off raft with, 5 feet, milfoil piled up. It was remarkable just how cooperative and helpful our property owners were. So if you see any milfoil floating, please pick it up and remove it. If you see some strands in front of your house, for those of you who are able to get down and pull it up by the roots, extremely important to do that. My wife did that. We saw a couple of strands right off our dock about a week ago. She went right down, pulled it up. It's now deceased on the shoreline, which is where it's supposed to be. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we've been doing, but probably the most important tool in our arsenal right now is our DASH program. What DASH is it says on the slide, it's diver assisted suction harvesting. And we've got a team of divers that go down to the bottom of the lake. They basically pull the milfoil out by hand, feed it into a suction tube, and then it's pulled up onto the boat, which you see there. It's a former pontoon boat. Then it's taken to shore and removed in a place where it can get back into the lake. Next slide, please. So next is something that we're doing a little bit of, not much, is Priscilla spot treatments. And the reason we do that is sometimes there are sites that, just because of the way they're configured, it's not efficient to have our DASH team basically go after those. And there's a limited amount of time in the summer where the DASH team can work, because by the middle of August the plants become too brittle to basically use suction harvesting efficiently, and the state will not let us start on our DASH program until the beginning of July, and that's because of the spawning for the fish. So there's only about a 6-week window that we can do this as far as DASH goes. So Priscilla is the other thing we've used, and as you can see, there are really only 3 sites this year that we used Priscilla on: 2 in the main lake, 1 in the little lake. Next slide, please. So one thing that's important to note, you can see that if you look at the main lake, the 2 sites in red were the Priscilla treatments. The total acreage was 8.7. Lake St. Catherine is an 852-acre lake in the main lake. That's 1% of the entire lake that was treated with Priscilla, which is obviously de minimis. And our herbicide treatment was only 10% of the total that we did in terms of treatment as a whole. So you can see the suction harvesting, the DASH was about 75 acres, and that's really where we want to focus. The reason there's still, not a lot of milfoil, but some milfoil in the lake, is the little lake had not been treated for years. And that was, we didn't do that because the Conservation Fund had its own program that they wanted to try. But as a result of no treatment down there, the milfoil exploded, and then it would float back up the channel into the main lake and reinfest it all over again. So it's extremely important that the milfoil in the little lake be addressed. Next slide, please. So if you look at where we were in 2021, the milfoil cover was basically at its lowest level since 2010 at only 3%. And if you go back to 2004, which is when our program really started, the milfoil in Lake St. Catherine as a whole was almost 50%. So it's a remarkable difference. In Little Lake, milfoil cover now is only 5%, which is down from 36% prior to our first treatment. And if you look at the GPS data points in the lake as a whole, 43 were in Little Lake. And the milfoil frequency in the Little Lake in 2001 was at 28%, which was down from 98% in 2020. And the reason for that reduction is in coordination with the Conservation Fund and the state of Vermont. We have a 3-year program to control the milfoil in Little Lake, which is why you're seeing such a widespread reduction. Next slide, please. So just one of the very important byproducts of our program is that the native plants that were suppressed for so long by the milfoil explosion, they've really rebounded quite nicely. And plant cover is good for a number of reasons. It's good for water quality. It's good for the fish. It's exactly what you want to see. And we have over 30 native aquatic plants in our lake system. And again, these are extremely important to maintain and sustain a healthy lake ecology. And so as Martha mentioned before, the things we've been doing are really based on a lot of research we do. We talk to a lot of different experts. We work closely with the state. And we do things based on evidence, not based on things you might read about on the internet, many of which are not accurate. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we can all do, as I mentioned, if you see milfoil, get it out of the lake, to the extent you can. That's extremely helpful. If you see a milfoil patch, driving through with your boat is not a good thing. Because again, every little fragment that's cut up and spread, that's a new plant that's going to start, another acre before you know it. If you have milfoil on your prop, we've all had that. The easy way to get rid of it is just reverse the engine and just drive away and leave it in the lake. If there's anything you can do, and I know it's hard, particularly with a larger engine where you can't just pull it up and reach back and get it, whatever you can do to try and remove it and get it out of the lake is extremely helpful. If you see it around your dock and in your swimming area, again, for those who are able, if you can get down there, pull it up by the roots, that would be great. And any fragments you see, again, if you can just pull those out, that would be extremely helpful. Next slide, please. So just actually, can we just go back for 1 second? So just a couple of other things that I would mention that would be extremely helpful. And you heard some of this from Martha and also on the loon presentation is one of the things that really helps in terms of reducing plant growth is keeping nutrients out of the lake. So if you've got a beautiful lawn that goes down to the lake, we know that that's great in so many ways. But if you could let the last few feet grow, don't mow it. Have a path in the middle to get down to your dock. That you could be surprised at the wonders that works in terms of reducing nutrient runoff. Not using fertilizer on your lawn, unfortunately, around the lake, that's really not a good thing to do. So if there's a way to avoid that, that would be great. And finally, construction projects create a lot of nutrient runoff. So you should have a silk curtain in front of your project or in front of your house. If your contractor hasn't done that, you should ask them to go ahead and do it. It's something that's extremely important. That's it. Thanks very much.
Yes, thanks, Jeff. Now we're going to go to water quality and Mary Jo.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to talk back through this. So for lake monitoring, we've been doing it for years and years, over 5 years. And our data from last year indicates that we're within the parameters of a mesotrophic state, which is pretty good, because I think we were well on our way to a eutrophic state 20 years ago. So I see that as we are improving.
beginning Memorial Day. Our session meetings this year have been between 4 and 5 meters each week, which is a little bit better, a little more consistent. It's been a pretty dry summer, so I think that's why your water clarity is what it is. I also test for cyanobacteria at the state park each week. There's no signs of it. If anybody is suspicious of having cyanobacteria, this hot weather, a little bit of rain, dry weather is a trigger for it. So if you suspect you see any cyanobacteria, give me a call. We can take a sample and submit it for the records. And it's not good to swim or have your animals anywhere near cyanobacteria. So if you suspect something like that, it's kind of a blue green. Sometimes it's whitish on the surface. Typically, if we get a rain, it mixes the water and it flushes it out. So it comes and goes pretty quickly. But that's an important thing to stay aware of. Next slide. The La Rosa Volunteer Project is it's a water testing of our tributaries, and with this 3-year program that we're on, we have partnerships with Castleton and Pulteney Meadowee. The La Rosa actually pays for the lab work, so it takes a little bit of the burden of it's very expensive to do the water testing, so they pay for the lab work, and we get these folks to help us do the tributaries, which are very dry this year. I think it was a little surprise to our Castleton folks to find out that all of our tributaries were dry this year. So they'll be doing it over the next 3 years for data collection. So it'll continue into the fall, winter, spring. It'll be a year-round thing. I think it's important to know, because the tributaries are dry, it's a sign that our biggest phosphorus dump into our lake is weather events. And if anybody's been around during some of those big weather events, you'll see particularly by the state park is the most obvious. Endless Brook just flushes anything that happens to be in its way right down into the lake. It happens in the winter. I've seen it go right out across the ice, right over to the other side. So these are things that we're looking at so that we can plan for watershed projects in the future and hopefully fix some of those, work on some of those roads and stream banks. The next generation, next slide. DEC is we're on their list for next year to participate in next generation lake assessment, which is, it takes place over 2 or 3 days. The scientists from the DEC will come down, do very intensive monitoring and testing. The assessment, they started doing this in 2010, and they collected data on the suite of physical, chemical, and biological parameters of the areas within the lakes, deep open water index sites, 10 randomly distributed shoreline littoral habitat sites, and inlets. So it's a real comprehensive program of testing and doing science and lab work on a variety of indexes for calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. I mean, they do turbidity, chlorophyll, seshi, dissolved oxygen, all those sorts of things. So that's going to help us move into our watershed planning process. We were lucky to get into that program, and that segues into the watershed action plan. Who's next?
And just real quick, all that data that MJ just talked about, we're going to use as part of the watershed action plan. We're going to be hiring a limnologist who's going to look at all that data, see if there's any missing data that they want to know about the lake, and they will use that to create a water testing plan. And then what that'll allow us to do is track our progress. So all these projects that we're implementing around the lake, we'll be able to see if our efforts are working. So next up is John. He's going to talk about the GRETA program.
Hi, John Belmavis. I'm the greeter coordinator. So the young adults you see down at the boat launch and the state park, those are part of our greeter program. So basically, in a perfect world, every boat that goes in and out of the lake would be inspecting and power wash with steam jetting, in a perfect world. So try to capture the most busiest times, weekends, holidays. We have 15 fishing tournaments, which is critical because boats come far and wide to New Hampshire plates, Massachusetts plates. They come here for fishing tournaments, and so we want to make sure we inspect everything that goes into the lake area. So as you can see, where we're going with the inspections, right? So in 2018, 2019, 2020 was COVID. Everybody was on a boat and everybody was going into a lake, right? That's the only thing you could do. 2021, the inspections fell off a little bit. And I think they were back to more normal, but that number doesn't reflect the actual amount of inspections we did. The state went to an online, we used to do it by paper and then we'd transmit it to the state. When the season was over, it was online. There were a few problems, not only with the state, but with our greeters. So when I checked, we missed a couple days. So those inspections were more. This year they have a dashboard where I can track that the data is going in. So our inspections go up. But we talk about how do we know when the progress we're making. So I just want to, in 2018, from those inspections, AIS was present. It was mostly milfoil and 161 inspections. So it was 149 that came out of our lake and 12 during the launch. So there was 12 vehicles, 12 craft that came in elsewhere that had milfoil on it. In 2019, out of those inspections, there was 159. 2020, COVID, we were up to 304. Last year we only had 59. Okay, so and again the numbers are down a little bit, but we're making progress. This year, when I ask all of the